Alright, everybody, hello and welcome to another episode of Reserve Team Rankings. Today we're going to be looking at A-League departures. Kind of a weird time in the world of football because a lot of different nations around the world are having a really difficult time bringing players in from other parts of the world. But interesting, and we've seen way more players leave the A-League this season for overseas clubs than we have perhaps in the last 4, 5, 6 years of the league itself. There's a whole bunch to discuss, a whole bunch of different transfers that we're going to get through, but thankfully I don't have to do it by myself. I'm joined today by reserveteam.com.au collaborator Jack George. Jack, thanks so much for joining me, mate.
Thank you for having me. Hope you're well.
I've been very, very good, mate. Getting very excited for the start of the A-League season now that we've got a date, now that we've got fixture list. We've got a huge derby, my team playing your team in round one. Home ground advantage goes to Sydney FC, which probably makes them favourites, but who knows which of us is going to have bragging rights once that game comes. Just an overall thing from yourself, Jack. Obviously, there's been a lot of A-League departures this season. Particularly, we've seen the Indian Super League come into it a lot more, starting to pick up some of our... Well, probably some of our premium talent and then also some of our maybe middle-of-the-road talent. We'll talk about that further as we go through each individual person. What are some of your overall thoughts on the departures from the A-League this off-season?
Well, there's obviously been a lot of departures. I think that's due to the virus, and there was a lot of talk of the CBA, and I think that really spooked a lot of players. Like, I think James Donahue is a prime example, moved to Newcastle Jets, and then all of a sudden he... I think got a bit spooked by how much will I get paid next season if it comes in for a loan deal from the Indian Super League with a fixed salary for the season, and he goes, yeah, I'll have to take it. I think, like, obviously there's some of them that you'd see coming, looking at the list I have it here, but there's a lot of them that I think have came due to the financial strain caused by the virus.
Yeah, and we hope, there are a lot of different stories about people going overseas and doing really well. We've had people in the Indian leagues for the last few seasons that have, consistently gotten good income and good playing time and all that sort of stuff. We hope this is all, positive stories and everyone that is leaving the league is going to get consistent paychecks and they're not just going to wind back up in the league itself. We've also seen the other side of the coin with players, getting missed payments or not getting their wages on time, all that sort of stuff. There's a level of comfort to playing in the A-League and playing in Australia and New Zealand, but we hope that most of these departures work out. So we are going to look at it a little bit differently. We're looking at it, Jack, from the perspective of the A-League itself. Very selfishly, we're going to say, who do we wish we could watch every weekend, but now don't get the opportunity to? So at the top of our list there, we've got big losses. It's a little bit more negative than what we usually do in these rankings lists, but who are the biggest players that we're going to have a difficult time replacing at their club or in the league itself? The next level down is we will survive. Like, it sucks that they leave, but we will get through it and we'll find the next player and somebody else will come up and get that chance. Smart move is in a scenario where the club and the player have both done particularly well, even though we're looking at it from the league itself. We do want to see, like a lot of our young players, including probably the one that you can see on the screen at the moment, we want to see them going into bigger and better leagues and playing at a higher level than ever before, even if it does kind of suck that they're not in the A-League anymore. And then good riddance. I don't think we'll get a whole lot that are actually in this bucket, but players that, it's fine that they've left the league. They weren't really offering that much anyway. I'm talking more, international marquee players that perhaps weren't of, a marquee standard, or international players, the 5 foreign visa spots that weren't necessarily that much better than any of the local talent that we had available. So it should be relatively straightforward. And then the other thing we've got, Jack, is our ranking rules. So if you and I, as we initially talk through a player, can't immediately kind of figure out where they are, our fallback is to run them past the ranking rules. The first one is the loss to the league that they present. What did they offer the league above me on their playing career that potentially we don't have now? The loss to their club. How's their club going to replace them as a player? Their potential ability. Were they 35 years of age and potentially not going to get any better, or were they 20 and potentially their best footballing years are ahead of them? And then the finances involved. Now, we don't know a whole lot about every single one of these transfers. A lot of them are mutual terminations of contracts. A lot of them are loan moves as well. If the finances are really good for the club, I think we probably put that one further down the list because the club has gotten quite a bit back, and that's always good for the A-League as well, seeing them get that transfer revenue in. I'm good to go, Jack. Do you have any questions or anything else you wanted to cover off before we get started?
No, it's all good.
Perfect, mate. All right, so the first one up, you can see him there holding his Birmingham City shirt, is Riley Mcgree. Of course, he's been around the A-League for a little bit, was at Newcastle, spent some time at Melbourne City, has been at Adelaide United, who just purchased him recently from Club Bruges over in Belgium. He makes the jump across actually to Charlotte FC in Major League Soccer, the MLS in the US. Unfortunately, they are not a club yet, so they don't actually enter the MLS competition until next year. He's spending 12 months and a full season on loan at Birmingham City in the Championship. Jack, immediate impressions on Riley Mcgree's move, what it means for the league and what it means for him?
Well, Riley Mcgree he's a big loss, but it's definitely expected. Like, Bruce Jitte said when he signed him, he said to Riley Mcgree himself, he said, I signed you on a 3-year deal, but I did not want you to be here at the end of the 3 years. That means that you've done something wrong, because he's a player in such high potential. Adelaide forked out, I think it was $400,000 for him or something around that margin. But they knew that if he continues to perform, he will make a huge profit in the future. He's done so. I actually believe that Charlotte FC, I think in loaning them to Birmingham City, it shows that they may not actually want him to start the MLS. I think that they could potentially make a big profit on him going to Birmingham City or somewhere else in the Championship before their season starts, which just bolsters their transfer budget, because not everyone has David Beckham as their club owner in America. So,
very
true. If you look at it from a financial point of view, it's a very smart move for Adelaide in terms of they got what they wanted. They made a profit on him. But realistically, if we're looking at it as he spent his whole career in Australia, I cannot see why he wouldn't be the best the best A-League player ever. And I think he is quite a big loss to the league. But what do you think? Like, how do we judge that?
So I think you kind of actually mentioned the words smart move just at the start of that sentence, which I think kind of does make sense. Yeah. Well, yes, I agree with you. He's a very talented player. He's very good. And I think he was very good for Adelaide last year, definitely amongst their best for the season. I think it is a smart move because I think he needs to be challenged and I think he needs to be playing at a higher level. There's only a certain level you can get to within the A-League until you start... he was already a star in Adelaide's side, so he wasn't going to get higher standing in terms of their squad. Maybe he was going to make the move to, like a Sydney or a Melbourne side that was going to be challenging for the title. I know Adelaide fans will be upset that I don't think that they're challenging for the title at the moment. But the reality is I think he's one of those players that really needs a bigger challenge, and Birmingham City is perfect for that. I think you touched on a really important point. If this is a move to Charlotte FC, it's probably not as good a move because I don't necessarily rate MLS as high as being, a step up developmentally. It's probably a little bit ahead of the A-League at the moment in overall playing quality. But if he manages to do well at Birmingham and Birmingham have some sort of contract clause to purchase him, a move to Birmingham City, much higher on the list, I would think. So I'd put it in smart move. I think Adelaide have recouped the cost that they paid for him. I think they've made profit on that. And at a time like 2020, it's a really good time for clubs to be getting that initial transfer revenue. Maybe it's kind of like that asterisk next to it about one for the future. If he stays at Birmingham, fantastic. If he goes to Charlotte, hopefully he does very well in Charlotte, and that's another springboard for him to get back to Europe as well. I would go with smart move. Are you okay with that positioning?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I think if you're going to look at him in terms of the quality, then he's definitely up there. But in terms of in terms of his loss to the league, I think every A-League fan expected he wasn't going to stay there for the full 3 years of his contract.
Exactly. And even though we're looking at this from an A-League perspective, we want young players to be going off and challenging themselves in Europe because that's the better thing for Australian football overall and New Zealand football as well. Another young player departing Adelaide United. We are going through these clubs alphabetically. You guys will figure that out relatively quickly. But Lachlan Brook didn't make a whole lot of appearances for Adelaide, obviously still only 18 years of age. He has made the move to Brentford in the Championship. Brentford are very famous, Jack, for going through and putting together good squads based on, similar to Moneyball. If you've seen that baseball concept, it's all very statistical analysis. And I think a lot of Lachlan Brook's signing was due to he's a very good athlete and very good athletically in the test that he did for them. What do you make of his move across to Brentford in the Championship?
Well, Brentford are one of, if not the only team that didn't actually have a youth team. They have a reserves, and he was signed for the reserves, but the thing Brentford do so well is they promote their reserves players. Like, I'll use Sarprat Singh as an example from Bayern. He went to Bayern Munich, right?
And so slightly different in Germany, where you mentioned it being a reserve side. It plays in it's technically an under-23s.
Third tier.
Well, no. So technically it's a separate competition off the wing of that.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so the third tier would be League 2. As far as England's concerned, but then what they've got now, and it's really complicated. If I tried to draw it on a map, it'd look like an octopus. But the difference with Germany and where Sarprat Singh went is he went to Bayern Munich 2, which is a side for Bayern Munich that plays in the second tier. Last year they got relegated. They're down in the third tier now. So it's a little bit different the way that the structures work between Germany and England. Sarprat Singh was in a Meds competition, just playing at a lower divisional tier. And if Bayern Munich wins that division, they can't go up any higher because it's their second side. So it's slightly different in the way that they develop players in clubs. But by all means, go on.
Well, I guess the point I was making is that Brentford are not afraid to promote people from their reserve squad to their starting team. And Lachlan Brooke has been, if he's going to Brentford's B team, he's obviously a very, very good player. I think we saw it in the A-League. He has a great left foot, maybe needs to work on his right if he's going to be a championship standard. Like, he's very, very one-footed, but super good cutting off the right. He swings in some really good balls. I think he has good vision for a young player, good composure. And like you mentioned, is very athletic. And I think if Brentford is signing for the B team, they don't sign players to play in the B team. They sign players to compete to be promoted to their senior squad. And I think that if he's got that much potential, if Brentford's got that much potential in him, I think he could be a big loss for the A-League. But I also do think that Adelaide recouped some money from him, made a profit. So maybe I would put him in smart move.
I think we're setting a precedent early where these like promising younger players in the league, if they are making good moves to good European sides where they could break into first team features, then yeah, that is a smart move. It's a smart move for the league to try and get that money back early. They're not really going to lose anything. And I think the smart thing that A-League sides are doing and should be doing is if they've got players coming back from Europe, they probably have the first option to try and pick up their contract or to try and purchase them for a certain price. So yeah, I think also a smart move. I think Adelaide have done some good business this transfer window, including some signings that they've made lately. We might talk about that towards the end. But yeah, some exciting stuff for them. I'd be more than comfortable with a smart move as well. The next one up, this one was a little bit of a surprise to me, I'm not going to lie. It's Nikola Miluznic. He makes a jump all the way over to Denmark with Randers FC, so he will be playing top flight football at 27 years of age, which I think is very impressive. Obviously, speedy winger, decent player at an A-League level. Not one that I would have called out as being, like an elite tier player to make that jump to Europe, if you were going to ask me for my best players around the league. What are some of your thoughts on his move and making the jump over to Europe?
I think Miluznic has really developed over the past few years. In terms of a player, I think that he was always very, very fast. He was always quite good at taking on his opponent, but he's really added, I think, with a sense of a lot of the young Adelaide players coming in, he's really added a sense of maturity to his game, not just in terms of leadership, but he's looking a lot more composed. All of his goals were very, very good last season for Adelaide. Ball movement, his just general stamina, and I actually don't know too much about Randers FC, the club he's joining, but I think that, like you say, he's not an elite level player. I think he does have the potential. He was a very good young player. I think he can continue to improve. The only worry I would have with him is he relies so much on his pace and athleticism in his game, and there will reach a point, whether it's 30, whether it's even starting now, that he will begin to decrease. And I don't know how many years he will last in Europe, but I think it's a good move for him.
Yeah, I think a good move for him. I think he was in the starting 11 for Adelaide. I think
Yeah.
they will still... I think this is prime candidate for like a we will survive category. So like at 27 years of age, he's not probably going to get another opportunity to go to Europe. So it's good that he's getting it, good that he's taking it, good that it is a decent standard league as well in Denmark. But I would drop him firmly and we will survive. I think Adelaide can replace him. I don't think it kills their team or their structure quite as much as some of the other players in their lineup might do. So I'd be happy putting him in that spot if you're cool with it as well.
Yes, it's a good spot for him.
Perfect. Right, jumping on to our next one as we head down our list. This is Merco Boland, a German midfielder that played for Adelaide. Some limited appearances, did have some issues with injury. We hear quite a bit from older players as they come from Europe to Australia that the harder pitches do cause a lot of wear and tear issues. And I think Boland was perhaps one that struggled to get fit in the early part of his Adelaide career. What are some of your thoughts on the midfield playmaker? He's, of course, moved back to Germany with VfB Lübeck in the third division, I believe. If I'm wrong, by all means, drop it in the comment section below. But where do you think we would place him in terms of being the first international player to depart the league?
I think that as a player, he was a good signing for Adelaide. Like you say, he's a playmaker, but he's more deep on the ball. I think he was quite similar, nowhere near as good, but quite similar to Isaias in the way he played. Good at short passing, good at long passing, very composed on the ball. But like you say, injuries. I think that in terms of you looking at it as Adelaide, get an extra foreigner for the upcoming season, it's a good move for Adelaide to get rid of him. I know it was a mutual termination. They don't receive any money for him. And I do think that he needs to move back to Germany. If the field's too hard for him, he can move back to Germany and he can get some more game time.
Yeah, and at 33 years of age, probably a good one to move on. Do you think he would sit in the We Will Survive category? Like a steady hand, but definitely no one that they can't replace, I think, in the modern market.
I mean, it's hard with the foreign players because that you look at the fact that they are taking up a foreign spot, whereas an Australian 33-year-old midfielder is very different because they're on a salary, and if they're injured for the season and you can't play them as much, they're not on their salary. It's okay though because it's just a salary. But whereas when you look at, you could get, instead of Merco Boland, they could have that new Spanish midfielder which they signed, who looks really a really good signing for them. But I do think that he is a We Will Survive.
Yeah, I mean, with expectations for the international players, because they do get that kind of like limited spot, that limited space available, you would expect at a big club, if they're paying for a marquee player, paying for an international player, that player would be in their starting 11 every week, and that would be one of the first names on the team sheet. And while he was quality, I don't think he's necessarily going to win them the league or anything like that. I think he was a steady hand to have around a young group, but definitely one that I think is in the right spot for where we've put him. Jumping forward to the first of a few players that we're going to highlight moving to this club, they've gone to Xanthi. The Sydney Olympic-owned pet project has also snared Tony Popovic, the Perth Glory manager, in the second division of Greece. They were relegated this past season. Paul Izzo is the man that jumps across, has been a goalkeeper across the league for quite a few years, is still relatively young, in his getting into his late 20s though. He's been at Central Coast, he's been at Adelaide United, has been in and around the conversations around better keepers in the league in the division. How do you think he's going to go in Greece, and what do you think this move means for the A-League itself?
Paul Izzo is a big loss for Adelaide because he was very stable. He was very, like you say, you want your foreign players to be the first in the team sheet. He was first in goals, as it is with many goalkeepers. But you look at, for example, Melbourne City, they had a bit of stability issues with Tom Glover, who did very well when he came at first team, Bezanis, who we will talk about later. Paul Izzo was a very good player. He's only 25, and for a goalkeeper, that's very young. Like you look at, for example, Andrew Redmayne was not a starter at 25. So Paul Izzo definitely has the capacity to improve. I think he has potential. I think his ball distribution is underrated in terms of just his composure on the ball. Obviously, Adelaide, they aren't really a possession team. They're more of a dynamic counter-attacking side. Especially with the young players they had, rather than Mcgree, Lachlan Brook. But I think he's very solid in goals, and smart move for him, but Adelaide will definitely miss him.
So whereabouts do you think that he would sit on the list? Probably towards the top end of it? I don't think he's in the good riddance pile, but whereabouts do you think we would position him?
Oh, no. I don't think he's quite at the top, plainly because that he hasn't the longevity of his career in terms of being in the A-League, or like what he brought to the A-League isn't enough. So I would put him in We Will Survive. But it is quite a big loss for Adelaide, and it will be interesting to see how they go to replace him.
Sure. What we can do as well, we can put him right at the top of We Will Survive. So, like, he's kind of towards the top of that group. Not quite at that big loss category. Maybe at the end, when we sit back down, we'll have a look at who's in big loss, who's in We Will Survive. And if there are any that jump out of us that we haven't been consistent with, or that we think maybe have moved up or down as our discussions have continued, we can move him around a later date. But I think you're pretty much spot on, mate. I think top of We Will Survive is a decent place to sit Paul Izzo, and we may have that conversation about the Xanthi a couple of times throughout the course of this evening as well. Next one, George Blackwood. He has also left Adelaide United, made the jump over to Harry Kewell managed Oldham Athletic, and so far doing relatively well. Scored a very good goal this past weekend. I think he's first for Oldham. By all means, I could be wrong. Correct me in the comment section below. But so far, working okay. Young striker, can also play in wide positions, which is how I think he's being used at Oldham. What are some of your thoughts on Blackwood and the move for him?
Well, I believe it's a smart move for him. He's a young striker, wasn't getting enough game time, and he had really, really good potential at the start of his career. I know he's been criticised for some of his finishing abilities, but his movement is very good. I think working under Harry Kewell, I know it's a very generic way to look at, Harry Kewell is a winger, but Harry Kewell will teach him how to be more composed in front of goal to the best of his ability. Obviously, some of that comes with just the way your mind works and just your personality. But I think that he was a very good young player in terms of his potential. Didn't quite make it at Sydney FC. Hasn't quite made it into the starting squad at Adelaide, especially with the rise of, they signed Mcgree, Alassane Toure, and then you've got the wide positions, Miller, Usnich and Halloran. But I think that this move is very smart for him in terms of he will get game time, and it's a good place to be under former Socceroo manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
Former Socceroo player.
Yeah, I got you, man. Australian manager as well. Looking at Australian players always helps. Side question for you. Given Sydney FC's striker department, we'll talk a little bit more about that with another big player coming up, but would you take George Blackwood at Sydney FC in the current squad?
I believe that Luka Ivanovic at this moment is better than George Blackwood, and that's my opinion, my personal opinion. I think that Luka Ivanovic has not been given enough game time, and if so, will rise to the occasion. Obviously, it's hard to judge a player who's played so little in the A-League, so I actually wouldn't take him at Sydney. I think that Kostova, and Bahasha will come good eventually. It's confidence, and it's playing under each other. They're both used to having a striker who scores with pretty much every touch. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because the thing that you could say about Blackwood, he's played under Graham Arnold, he played under Marco Kurz, he's and at Adelaide with a few different coaches during his time, and now he's at Oldham. All of his coaches have played him, so he must be either a fantastic trainer or he listens well or he's easily coachable, so there must be something about him. But yeah, I'd agree. I think Ivanovic has just got a little bit of a shade on him, but we'll see. Maybe Ivanovic gets a Premier League move or something like that because of that little bit of extra quality. We'll see how that comes in 12 months' time. The next one didn't make too many appearances for Adelaide United. This is Christian Opseth. He made the jump over to Bengaluru, joining Australian Eric Pardalu and a few other expat players in that league. Where do you think this one sits? Obviously, another international player, similar to what we spoke about with Merco Boland. Where would you position him on the list?
Opseth was a player when he moved to Adelaide that I think me personally, I was very excited to see how he did. He's a very tall striker. He's very good. I think he showed his link-up play is exceptional. He, in terms of the quality set by the league, he can finish. Confidence issues were a thing. And it doesn't help when Al Hassan Toure broke out pretty much at his expense, forcing him to sit on the bench for the start of the season until he got injured. I think in terms of what he brought to the league, it's not too much. I think it's actually quite good that the club got rid of him, and because like I said, he is a foreign player, and now they can sign another foreign player, whether it's a striker, whether it's anywhere on the pitch. And I think that he had great potential, old player, but in terms of potential to succeed when he signed for Adelaide. But I think now that he's left, I think that the Adelaide fans going, it's expected.
Yeah, I mean, Adelaide for quite a few seasons really struggled to kind of fill the void up front where they were just lacking that really high quality striker to get them 15 goals a season. They tried a variety of different players, had some quality come in directly from Europe. They thought maybe he was going to be the answer, and it never bodes well where before the season's even started, you've lost your position to a 17-year-old. Not because that 17-year-old isn't quality, but, it's a young player. You'd expect an experienced head to hold that starting position and the young player to develop into a first-team player under their guidance over time. I would maybe advocate to put this one in the first good riddance pile. Not that he's a bad player, not that he did poorly, but it's it's worked out fine. And the other portion as well, future spoilers, which I always tell you not to do, but then do myself because I'm a hypocrite, is that they just signed Tommy Juric, who I think is a fantastic get for Adelaide United. So he's going to be huge for them this season as well. So maybe we put him in good riddance, and then maybe at the end we will say, we'll have another look and see how we go if we still feel that way, because it is a bit harsh on him, but I just like balance. We've got to get someone in there at some point, so we might as well start early and see how we go from there. The next one that we're going to jump across to is I've got to remember his name because I always say this around the wrong way.
Holloway.
Aaron Amadi Holloway. I was about to say Amadi Holloway Aaron, which is completely wrong, but he makes his way over to SC East Bengal, one of the teams in the Indian Super League where quite a few players have jumped across. He was at Brisbane Roar for one season after joining from Shrewsbury Town in League 2 the season before that. Jack, what are some of your thoughts on how he performed as an international player in the league, and what do you think it means for him to leave the league itself?
I wasn't particularly a fan of Aaron Amadi Holloway, not because he's a bad player, but basically because Brisbane brought him on and it meant it's a long ball into the box, which is not the way I like to see football be played. Nothing against him, but I think in terms of what he brought, it was a lot of substitute appearances and a lot of scaring defenders towards the end of games. I guess in a kind of similar way that Matt Simon did for Sydney FC. but before he moved back to the Mariners. But Aaron Amadi Holloway, he only had one season in the league. Did he? He scored one,
I think he got one early on in his career, but he didn't start a lot of games. He took an international spot. No. He was brought off the bench, as you've mentioned already, in the last 10, 15 minutes of a lot of matches. And by all accounts, he's kind of a bit of a tool as well, as far as his social media and stuff is concerned. So I would maybe make a case for another one to say good riddance to. Yeah, there's a couple of different Reddit threads on there. I'll send them to you after this one. You can go and check them out. They might not be 100% like accurate because it's internet accounts. You never really know what the story is, but I don't think he brought a lot to the league. I think potentially, like, there's a lot of just big, ugly, shithouse, gangly strikers in the NPL leagues. Like, you can go and get a big last 10 minutes of a game type striker relatively easy. I don't think he brought anything that we don't already have in Australia, but he did take that position away from an Australian player. So I would perhaps, again, maybe a bit harsh.
From a young Australian player.
Yeah, again, maybe a bit harsh because he's not a bad player by any stretch. I don't think we're reflecting that. But as far as A-League departures go, no problem with him leaving. And I don't think many Brisbane fans are going to jump in the comment section below saying they're devastated that Amadi Holiday has left. So maybe we throw him alongside Opseth, and again, we can have a look at the end and see if we still feel the same way after that. Jumping forward to the next one, though, we are going to have a look at another Brisbane Roar player who had a long career over in the Championship in England with Peterborough and with Rochdale and a few other sides. It is Brad Inman, or Brad Inman, as he went when he was over here. What were some of your thoughts on him as a player for Brisbane, how he performed in the league, and his move across to ATK Mohan Bagun, who I've probably butchered the pronunciation of? By all means, slate me in the comment section below, which I think is the club that used to be owned by Atletico Madrid, but isn't anymore. What are some of your thoughts on his move and how it impacts the league itself?
Brad Inman wasn't a player who particularly impressed me during Brisbane. I thought that he was being played in a role more of like a false nine attacking midfield role where he wasn't the central striker. He was more of a winger, but he was very central. I think that he is a player. I think he was a bit similar to Miller Jusnic. But the difference is Miller Jusnic played out wide because that he wasn't as good on the ball in terms of in tight situations, a bit less composed. And I think that doesn't reflect poorly on Brad Inman as a player. Maybe on the way I would have personally played him in a different position. Obviously, in Brisbane Roar's system, they don't have wingers, they have wing backs, and they have attacking midfielders who drift wide to an extent. He had a very good run of form. I think that it's a smart move for him to continue his journey, move on from Brisbane, where it maybe wasn't the best year for him. And I think it's a smart move for Brisbane because that they have some.
Oh, no, you're all good. Yeah, I think, like, I'd echo the same point. I think some of what we've spoken about is potentially the way he was coached last year. Like, Brisbane's playing A when it worked wasn't that pretty, and it didn't make the most of players that were good on the ball. He scored a cracking goal against Melbourne City, because most players in the league do, which was really tidy feet, where he kind of kept it in a tight space around 4 or 5 players, and he had a really good finish. So there was definitely that quality there, but there's a part of me that thinks, well, why isn't that player allowed to get on the ball in that area more often? Why is it such a long ball or a crossfield switch or whatever else that comes consistently? And I think that was kind of the way they managed. I'd agree with you on the smart move portion, because I think for some of these players, this is really their last chance to get a good payday over in India. And he's not on loan. He's actually had his contract terminated and moved permanently to help get him a good contract. Where I think it gets tricky is, do we say this is a we will survive one? Because it's not. He was a good player and a good Australian player, but the move kind of makes sense for all parties, or do we say it's a smart move because he's gotten himself a bit of extra cash? I'm happy with either one. I'm happy to defer to your judgment on where we sit him.
I don't see how it makes too much of a difference. I think it's a smart move for him. I think it's a smart for the club, but we will survive from it. Probably, I'm not sure. He's a bit older, so maybe go with the trend and put him in. We will survive.
That sounds good to me. At least we're being consistent then. Our smart move stuff is more for the younger players, which there are a few more coming up as well. He looks nice sitting next to Merco Boland there. I think they're at similar points in their career, which is good to see. We jump forward to another Brisbane Roars player, another one heading to the Indian Super League as well. Scott Neville. He joins on SC East Bengal in Calcutta on loan. It's a 1-year loan deal. He has re-signed with Brisbane as well on a 2-year contract, so there is potential he does come back to the league. Those loan signings do make it a little bit less high risk. Scott Neville kind of defies opinion. A lot of players and coaches seem to really like him. He's been in a few very talented sides. He was at Western Sydney Wanderers, of course, was at Perth Glory as well in the very well-run Tony Popovich side. What are some of your thoughts on him as a player and what he meant to the league in departing it?
Scott Neville was very good for Perth rotation because he could play right wing back and right centre back and to an extent left wing back. So I think in terms of what he offers to the league, he offers a lot of versatility. I think he really found himself a home in the right centre back role in Brisbane Roar last season, where he could at times overlap the right wing back, like go forward, use his engine, but also at times he'd sit back. He's quite good on the ball, especially when you think he's a fullback who's converted to a wide centre back role. So he's relatively good on the ball. I think that Brisbane will definitely miss him this season. He was quite consistent in the way he played, and in terms of the way they play with such a defensive system, he at times a defensive system, they will miss him. But I also think that it's a smart move for him. Like you say, it's a payday. He's definitely going to get paid. He's going to get paid this.
Yeah, and I think he's 28 now. So, like, again, for some of these players, international football, it's not really a window that's going to stay open for them too long. Whereabouts do you sit him? A little bit different from Braden Inman in that he was around the league for a long time. Inman, of course, had a long career in Europe. Where would you position him in terms of somewhere between, I think, We Will Survive and Smart Move?
I would say he is a We Will Survive because he deserves credit for his time served in the league. He was often on the subs bench and coming on rotation option, and he broke himself into the side last season, and he deserves this move to India.
Yeah, and maybe this is a separate podcast topic for another week or a separate ranking topic. It's an interesting one to me that someone in India looked at him and said, oh, that's what we need, because we've got, like, he's good and he's a steady hand and everything, but is he going to single-handedly win an Indian Super League side games or anything like that? I don't really know. So a great move for him, but I think Brisbane will survive. I think Brisbane have still got, like Jack King get to play out wide. I still think they've got a few central defenders as well coming through their ranks that will help them continue to improve and get better. But we wish him, of course, all the best. And worst case scenario, he's back at Brisbane in 12 months. If it doesn't work out in India, that's the nature of his contract extension and his loan. The next one, Jordan Murray, was, of course, at the Central Coast Mariners for quite a while. I looked at this photo for about 25 minutes, Jack, because I can't figure out if it is a Photoshop or if it is actually him in the photo itself. It's really difficult to tell.
I think that's a Photoshop.
I think it's a photo.
I think that's a Photoshop.
See, I don't know. It's hard to say because I couldn't find... Because there's one coming up, and I'll tell you when we get to it, where it is definitely someone else's head on somebody else's body, and I'll see if you can pick it as we go through them. This one I couldn't find, like, the original of Jordan Murray's head. Like usually if you search for Jordan Murray in the club name, it comes up with, like his old photo for Central Coast or something like that. I couldn't find it. So I don't know. If anyone knows, anyone got insider info, is this a Photoshop or not? Let us know in the comment section below. But obviously Jordan Murray always seemed a capable player, had a very good scoring record at an NPL level, but was perhaps unfortunate to be in a Central Coast Mariners side that really struggled to get him the ball a lot of the time. What are some of your thoughts on his move, being a little bit younger? I think he's 24, 25 years of age, to Kerala Blasters, where he'll no doubt get a decent payday in the Indian Super League.
He was, I think you're right in terms of he was unfortunate to be in a Mariners side that didn't create many chances for him, but there were quite a few that he did miss. And I think that in terms of the role he was trying to play, maybe half target man, half poacher, I don't think the poacher role served him justice. It's quite interesting because that he scored 2 goals against Melbourne City, actually, with no fans. And my uncle, who's a Mariners fan, said to me, is that just a thing? Maybe he doesn't like pressure. Like maybe he's... And I don't think it necessarily is, because I think if you're a professional footballer, you have to be able to deal with some sort of pressure. Also, no disrespect to the Mariners, but they don't have as many fans like in the stadium as some other teams. So I don't think that the pressure was necessarily that high for him. I think if he was to be a clinical finisher, he would be quite a loss to the league. I think the Mariners won't necessarily, maybe they'll miss more of what he was to the club in terms of a player with his head on his shoulders who would always turn up, try his hardest, than a goal scorer or a technically gifted player. I think it's a smart move for him to move on to the Indian Super League and make some money. And I think but also at the same time, it's like you say, I wouldn't pick out Jordan Murray as the player that the Indian Super League teams would watch and go, oh, geez, we need this guy on our team. Even if it's just like I think he's played one game so far, he came off the bench for 10, 15 minutes. But even so, I don't think that it's a play you'd want, but they could have spotted something that I didn't.
Yeah, he's at the same club as another player that we're going to get to in a little bit further down our list as well. And I think even in that arrangement, he would still be the backup striker. So we'll talk about that one further a little bit once we get down to it. But I would think maybe alongside Scott Neville is a good player and a decent hand. And I think he was kind of what you said. I think they asked him to be a target man, and he's not necessarily that. Like, I think he'd need a bigger frame next to him and to get the most out of him as kind of an in-behind striker. But, it will be interesting to see how it plays out, because there's occasion in history before in the A-League where players that perhaps you didn't expect to go overseas and absolutely smash it. So, and there's also something to be said. I think the English Premier League with no fans is the highest scoring start to a season that they've ever had. So there's something about this like training ground mentality for a lot of players that seems to be coming through, not just at the A-League level, but at the elite level all throughout the game. So yeah, who knows? If he turns around and ends up the season with 15 goals, I think he's probably showed both of us up, Jack. But I think for now, this is one that we could comfortably survive without worrying too much about it.
Yeah, I think if he was to score 15 goals, I think it's quite unlikely.
If he's going to do it, it'll be to spite both of us. He'll see this list somehow. Someone will tag him in it on Twitter, and we'll hear all about it throughout the course of the year. The next one, perhaps a little bit more interesting of a prospect for this one, as I just struggle to bring up the photo, is Samuel Silvera, who joins Pacos Ferreira over in Portugal. He's immediately gone out on loan to Casa Pia, who I believe are 2 divisions below their top flight or parent club, I guess. A very talented, promising player, again from Central Coast. What are some of your thoughts on his move? And really not a super well-worn path in terms of players jumping into Portugal. We don't see too many go directly from the A-League to there. So what are some of your thoughts on Silvera as a player and the move itself for him?
Silvera, I think, was a very, very good young player when he first came into the side. I found it quite weird that he wasn't signing games at the start of the season, but then Alan Stadger came out and said it's to make sure that he doesn't get too ahead of himself. I then think that despite that, he got a bit too ahead of himself and tried to be the player he wasn't. He's a tricky winger. He's fast. He's got an eye for goal. He can make the passing behind. He tried to turn himself into an all-action number 10 from the wing, who would be like kind of similar to Jack Grealish for Aston Villa in terms of everything goes through him, and more often than not the things that go through him didn't come out. And he's a brilliant young player. He has a lot of potential. I think I could see him in Portugal one day, but he needs to learn that he has a role in his team, and he needs to stick to what he's best at, which is being that right winger, left winger, cutting inside or hugging the touchline, using his pace to get in behind when he can, taking on a defender, and just keep on recycling the ball through the wings.
Yeah, I mean, time's on his side. Like, still obviously a very young player, but I don't know enough.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know enough about Pacos Ferreira, about their like record of youth development or anything like that. So maybe we're a little bit, being in Australia, obviously English-speaking bias, where some of the English leagues around the world, we know a little bit more about how clubs develop players. Like, we know Brentford's quite good at bringing their own players in. We know George Blackwood's getting positions and chances at Oldham. I would hope that it all works out for Samuel Silvera, because it's for the good of the national team and for the good of the league itself. But I think this is a smart move. I think maybe we put him towards the bottom end of the smart move list as one that remains to be seen. I would still think, given his age, he's probably going to play youth level football. I'd expect him to be in an under 18s, under 19s side rather than challenging for first team football. But who knows, 2-3 years time, it could be an entirely different story. And I think what's positive is that he signed for Pacos Ferreira and then immediately went out on loan. So they clearly had some sort of intention for him. They clearly had some sort of plan as to how they were going to develop him. So I'm happy with smart move, if you're happy with that one as well.
Yeah, and that's not to say he's a bad player. It's just I think that Alan Stadger, the fact that he was so wary that of not starting him plenty, so he didn't get a bit ahead of himself in terms of, I'm this good, whereas he's actually this good. And I think that it shows that he's playing players like Josh Nisbet, got a lot of games last in towards the back end, and is a similar age, I think 2-3 years older. but I think it showed that he maybe does have that capacity. But if he can channel that into using his abilities to good, he could be a Portugal, maybe a lower level team, but in the Portuguese first tier someday.
Yeah, and I mean, some players, like, they do deliberately try to do that. I don't know if you remember, but Daniel Arzani had the same thing where he wasn't starting games and he kept getting asked, why is he not starting games? Well, he's not fit enough to start games and we need to work him into the team. Like, it's not about just immediately uncovering a player and bringing him on. There's work that you've got to do on the training ground to get there. So sometimes reverse psychology like that, Jack, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes you'll tell someone that they're not that good and they'll think they're not that good. Sometimes you'll tell them it's because they're too good and they'll start thinking they're too good. So, it's a kind of a different one, a strange one, but we hope it works out the best for him as well. Jumping to, from a young player to a very, very old player in the league, Michael Mcglinchey, of course, had a long career at the Central Coast in their main heyday under Graham Arnold, was at Wellington Phoenix as a full New Zealand international. Back at Central Coast last season, he's made the jump back to League 2 in Scotland, which is where he's born, where he grew up. He came from the Celtic Academy as a younger player. He plays for Queen's Park. I don't know if you're familiar with these guys, Jack, but they are a permanently amateur team. They might have changed that. Someone's probably going to fire off from Scotland in the comment section below, but they only have amateur talent. They are associated with the Queen's Park University in Scotland, and they play out of Hampton Park, which is the big 50,000 seat arena that the Scottish national side plays out of. So a very, very interesting move, but I think a player coming to the end of his career and obviously looking to play a little bit closer to home and to where his family's based. Where would you rate Michael Mcglinchey as far as his long-term career in the league, I guess, and this move kind of probably the last one of his career?
If you were to look at Mcglinchey, what he's done over his career, I've only started watching the A-League 3-4 years ago, so I wouldn't actually know what he did for majority of his prime. If you were to look at it from maybe the last 2 seasons he's spent at the Mariners, the Mariners will be, without being too disrespectful, quite happy that he's gone. He did not play many. I think he played 2 or 3 this season off the bench.
Will survive. Michael Mcglinchey had a great career. For the early part of the A-League, he was like one of the staples of that kind of first, the 4-4-2 or the 4-2-2-2 that Graham Arnold kind of developed further at Sydney FC. That was originally like a 4-1-2-1-2. Like a midfield diamond as a 4, and he was on the right-hand side of that, and Ola Bezanis was on the left. He was part of that first proper Graham Arnold side. When Graham Arnold actually left and went to manage in the J-League, the one player that he took with him was Michael Mcglinchey. So he obviously rated him very highly in that structure and that setup and getting it there. But yeah, I'd echo the same sentiment. Perhaps a player that was maybe kept around at the Mariners to help guide some of the younger players through as kind of an older head looking to give back to the community. I don't necessarily think his level of play has been at an A-League level for the last few seasons. So we wish him all the best. Thank him for his fantastic services in the league, but I think a good move for all involved. We'll survive that one in Michael Mcglinchey as he is currently within the league itself. So jumping forward, another Central Coast Mariner making the jump over to the Indian Super League. This is Dylan Fox joining Northeast United. Did have a brief career at Wellington Phoenix. Spent last year with the Central Coast. He's a left back by trade, can play a little bit in midfield and at centre back as well. What are some of your thoughts on Dylan Fox as a player and his move across to India?
I rated Dylan. I was quite excited to see the Mariners sign Dylan Fox last season. He's got a lot of potential. I think he had a little bit of an attitude problem. But when he did play, he does a few mistakes, but you can expect that from a young centre-back. His ball playing from defence was good. He was quite good in the tackle and had relatively good positioning. I think if you were to put him next to a more experienced centre-back, he will succeed with the constant chatter of be here, be there, and that will slowly but surely improve his positioning, his just general intelligence on the field. I think it's a smart move. I think I put him in a smart move because I think it's a smart move for him to further progress his career, especially considering he wasn't a guaranteed starter for the Mariners. I think necessarily for the Mariners, it's not a great move. There wasn't a transfer fee, was there?
No, so some of these players, most of the ones that went to the Indian Super League either had mutual terminations of their contracts where the club agreed to let them out of their deal to go and sign in India, or they're on loan. I don't think any of the lists that we've got, Indian Super League talent or Indian Super League moves, where the club actually received a fee in any way. And some of that's probably telling with the players that have actually moved across. It's not the elite players like some that we'll get to in a moment, some of your favourites will they dictate a fee, and that comes with that. I'd agree with you. I think smart move's a good position to put him in. He wasn't going to get game time at Wellington because Kakache, who we'll get to in a little bit, he was obviously the starting choice and the young player ahead of him in the pecking order. It was interesting, I think, that he didn't make as many inroads at the Mariners as potentially I think yourself and a lot of different players thought it could. So maybe a fresh round, maybe a little bit of an increase in wage will help him a little bit further. And he's still young enough that if it doesn't work out, he can come back to the A-League and he'll continue to get opportunities. So I think smart move is absolutely fine for him. And we'll jump forward to the next one, which is Abraham Majok. Now, I had to go digging to find out where he actually ended up, Jack. So he's playing in the second division of Cyprus over in Europe with a team called PAEEK or PAAEK. I saw it spelled both ways in the list that I've put here in front of you. I didn't really see a tremendous amount of him, to be completely transparent with you, Jack. You're a little bit closer being up in Sydney to where he was playing with Western Sydney. What are some of your thoughts on him as a player and the move over to Europe?
Majok, he very physical, very tall, very fast. He was more of an athlete than a football player, in my opinion. He was quite clumsy on the ball for the Wanderers, and he got quite not a lot of game time, but for a young player, he got quite a bit of game time towards the start. I think around mid last season, coming off the bench, but I think it's decreased slowly. In terms of he's had a few not clear-cut chances, but chances where you'd expect to hit the target, where he's got the wrong technique, he's leant back and he's just absolutely rifled it with a very powerful shot, to be fair, but rifled it over the bar on multiple occasions. I think that he's got decent potential, but I do also think that the fact that he's gone to the second division in Cyprus says a bit about maybe his quality as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that you've just described screams we will survive this one to me. But, you know, like if players are going to leave the league, there's two trails of thought to it. Go back and play in NPL and sharpen up your game and try and get there. The challenge that comes from that, though, is that there isn't a great track record of A-League sides actually, you know, bringing players in from the NPL itself. Like, it kind of, I think, has a reputation that if you go back to NPL, there's no pathway for you to go back to the A-League because of requirements in the league about registering players under the age of 23 or stuff like that. Like, Jordan Murray's a great story that we've already spoken about coming across from NPL competition, but there's just as many players that have been signed from the NPL that never made first-team appearances. So it's an interesting path that he's tread, but I think based on your description, happy to put him in the We Will Survive bucket. Wish him all the best. Hope it goes well. Hope he scores goals and get himself into a bigger European competition or into, you know, a larger European country that might have a bit more of a full footballing culture to try and continue his development. The next one, and this one's probably going to sting us both for slightly different reasons, Jack, is Josh Brillante. Obviously was a long-time player, or actually first started in the A-League as a young player at Gold Coast United, was at Newcastle Jets for a while, where they really made him a focal point of their side. Made a big money move over to Europe early in his career, played in and around Italy, a few divisions there. Came back to Sydney FC, where he was, of course, a championship and premiership winning player for the Sky Blues, and last season spent the year at Melbourne City, and you can see him here looking fantastic in the red and white stripes, but this is a grand final defeat. I would make a case here, Jack, and it's our first one that say he's a pretty big loss to the league because he was, I think, one of the better players in the league. Well, yes, it's a fantastic move for him at 27 years of age now. He is, you know, probably a fringe Socceroo, so to speak, and one of the better midfielders as far as the overall league is concerned. What are some of your memories of Josh Brillante and his time at Sydney, and where do you think he fits in the league itself?
Brillante was extraordinarily good for Sydney in the way they played. He was good on the ball, and his engine allowed them to... What you see with Sydney now is Bratton playing more deeper and Rattray box-to-box. But Brillante and O'Neill had such a good relationship that one of them, usually O'Neill, but Brillante had the capacity to go box-to-box, so did O'Neill. And that rotation really confused opponents. Brillante, he didn't have the perfect end to his Sydney career. Well, obviously he did grand final win, but in terms of his individual performances, I think the move to after demanding a move to the K-League, but I think that it was a move to Melbourne City was exactly what it needed, and I think it showed that people didn't rate necessarily his technical ability, but in an Eric Monbear side where Melbourne City were very possession based, he was brought in to be the shuttler, the we press and I take up this space kind of player. Made lots of vital interceptions and tackles, but he showed his quality on the ball, and I think he is a big loss to the A-League. He joined Roma, I'm pretty sure, in Italy, and actually made an appearance for them and got taken off. But I think the fact that he started a Serie A game for Roma shows the potential he has.
Yeah, so it was Fiorentina, and then he went to Empoli. No, that's all right. I don't think we've got a big Roma audience, but if they want, your Twitter handle's on the page, so I'm sure that they'll come and let you know about it sooner rather than later. But yeah, he was fantastic. Not since we had Aaron Moy have we had a player that was able to operate centrally on their own and still dictate play and still dictate tempo the way that he did. He was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And I think he goes in the big loss category because I don't think, despite Melbourne City's vast resources, I don't think we've found a like-for-like replacement just yet. There is still time in the window. We do still have some players up our sleeve, but they haven't brought anyone in that's like, really going to be that main man in our midfield. It's a variety of different players that we've had in previous seasons or youth prospects that are potentially going to get there. But we hope it works out well for him, but again, I think another player that, we want to see performing well and doing well. Even though we put him in big loss, we want to see the move work out for him and we want to see him playing well for Xanthi. Sorry, Jack, you were going to say something there?
I would say that it's definitely not a replacement of as high quality, but Taras Gamulkar, I do believe he should be off topic, but he should be given some game time. And I think that he's a very different player to Brillante, more of a deep line playmaker than a defensive midfielder to say, but I think that he could live up to his reputation that he showed in very short amount of time at Adelaide and replace Boland.
This channel is built on going off topic, so feel free to go off on whatever tangents you feel like, mate. That's absolutely fine. The next one, goalkeeper Dean Bezanis was previous at Melbourne City. He makes the jump over to Sutton United in the 5th tier of English football, so well down the pyramid. This one's kind of got an asterisk next to it because he made this jump to go and support his partner, of course, Matilda Steph Catley, who's now playing for the Arsenal women's side. I have opinions on him, but I will let you go first, Jack. What are some of your thoughts on Dean Bezanis? You would have seen him when he was a backup goalkeeper, maybe in the early days of Sydney when you were a fan, and then at Western Sydney as well before most of his playing career or first team appearances in the A-League at Melbourne City over the last.
Well, I'll let you voice your opinion on him, but I just like to say that, did you see that?
Yes.
He played for Sun United. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen that, search that up because that is, I do not know what happened there, but the fact that it's bad.
He'd gone, so for people that haven't seen this clip, it's easy to find on Twitter. If you search Bezanis, it'll probably come straight up. He must have just got distracted and gone for a hot dog or something and just kind of walked away while the player had the ball about 20 yards out from goal. And really, the player just kind of passed it into the far corner. And because he was so far to the other side of his goal, he couldn't get back across in time. So, look, I would put this one in the good riddance category. Not because Dean Bezanis isn't a good player. Dean Bezanis is a good player. He was unfortunate, I think, in a scenario at Melbourne City where he was replacing a fan favourite and an older player in Thomas Sorensen. When he first came into the first side, he was kind of representative of a manager that we didn't really like, Warren Joyce, who continued to play him despite him having obvious troubles and obvious confidence issues. And then for a while, he was really holding back Tom Glover, who's, of course, a youth international for Australia and doing quite well from making his first team appearances, even though we'd seen glimpses of Tom Glover and he'd been excellent during that time. So I think he's unlucky with a couple of circumstances relating to his appearances. But having said that, making a jump across to the 5th division, and he's playing semi-professional football at the moment. He's not playing professionally. So I would put it in the good riddance category because I just think it's a poor move. I think he could have really pushed himself to try and get a contract with a League 1, League 2 side because he was an academy goalkeeper at Liverpool. We know there are teams in and around that level that could give him an opportunity in goal and he could go for it. But instead, I think he kind of took the easy option to drop down a level to try and maybe not take his football as seriously or to try and get decent cash on a part-time wage. I'm sure he's on probably £500 a week, which is wages that you and I would dream of, Jack, once you convert that back to Australian dollars. I think good riddance is very harsh and I'm being very harsh with that, but I just don't think it's a good move for the player other than being close to his partner, which I completely understand. And I don't really think it's a good move for his playing career and playing prospects. Jumping down to semi-professional football at 27 years of age is really kind of a resignation that your career's not over, but your career's taking a step back. There are people fighting tooth and nail across this country and across England as well in semi-professional football that are fighting tooth and nail to try and get a professional contract. And he kind of just walked away from that, sort of. Not that we could question too much because, like mental health is a big part of the game now, and, player well-being and all that sort of stuff is super important. If being there with his partner is the most important thing to him, fantastic. But I don't know. I'm happy to defer to you on this one, Jack. Where would you sit him on the tier list that we've got here?
No, I think that he's not overall that big of a loss to the league in what he offered. And I agree, he is going to join Steph Catley. And I think that's very important, both for him in terms of his mental well-being, but Steph Catley, who's playing at an Arsenal women's side, a very big team, and may would prefer to have Dean Bezanis there. But moving from A-League, what he had at the start of the season was a starting goalkeeper position, to a fifth tier in England, semi-professional, is not a good move for him.
All right, so we'll throw him in good riddance, but it is very harsh. I don't not like him. He wasn't a terrible player by any stretch. He's, like you've mentioned previously with other goalkeepers we've spoken about, distribution excellent, but maybe just one. Yeah. It feels weird seeing a player in their prime effectively moving to semi-professional football. So hopefully it all works out. Hopefully he finds a move to a bigger tier, or hopefully Sutton gets promoted and he goes up that way. The old classical stories, but we'll see how that one plays out. Another interesting one, James Donahue has made the jump not just from Melbourne Victory. He moved to Brisbane Roar, and then I take that back. Sorry, Newcastle Jets, and then from Newcastle Jets he has gone on loan to FC Goa in the Indian Super League. A big proper defender came through at Brisbane Roar, was at Melbourne Victory as we already mentioned. Will be at Newcastle Jets at some point in the future. Signed a 1-year loan deal after signing a 2-year contract at Newcastle. What are some of your thoughts on James Donahue and the move for him over to the Indian Super League?
James Donahue was pretty much the only consistent player, along with Lee Broxham, who sometimes played in the defensive line for Melbourne Victory last season. I thought that he performed admirably, considering the circumstances he was put in. Very unstable in terms of managers, 3 managers he had, or head coaches, however you want to put it, and a consistent changing of backline. Both next to him, he played right centre back, so on the right back, and left centre back in terms of in midfield as well. But he just was consistently not brilliant, not a player you go, oh wow, man of the match tonight, but he was just there. He was in the right place at the right time in terms of the defensive perspective, good on the ball, and I think that I was quite excited to see him move to Newcastle. I thought he would have offered a lot to them, but obviously he's looking for the extra money at them.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it earlier for Scott Neville and stuff, that security, Newcastle's ownership situation, their coaching situation, still no head coach at the time of recording and release of this video. So, you can't really blame him for trying to get that security for himself. I'd put him alongside Paul Izzo in that it's a player that will survive, but he's a good player. He was a good player in the league and I think did quite well. And we're hopeful that we see him back in the league and doing well again. Or he does really well in India and gets himself even more cash in the K-League or J-League or something like that. But I think alongside Paul Izzo, if you're cool with that. Perfect. All right, jumping to the next one. This is a bigger name for the league. Lawrence Thomas. Now, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this. I apologise to anyone listening. I think it's Sondieski is how you pronounce that. Again, could be completely wrong, could be miles off. But I think Lawrence Thomas was perhaps one of the better goalkeepers in the division over the last 4 or 5 seasons. He had phenomenal performances in Melbourne derbies, which absolutely drove me insane. And then had also fantastic performances in grand finals. The grand final defeat of Newcastle a couple of seasons ago, he was the man of the match by a long way. And so far has hit the ground running at his new club. What are some of your thoughts on Lawrence Thomas and the move over to Europe for him?
I think Lawrence Thomas could be a candidate for a big loss to the A-League. He was brilliant at Melbourne Victory. He maybe dropped off, I think, ever since that 6-1 loss, without wanting to be the Sydney fan that brings up the 6-1 loss every time I speak. But he has dropped off a little bit in terms of maybe the confidence. But still an extremely consistent goalkeeper who, like you said, has made a good start for his new side. And has been just so many pretty much match-winning performances for Melbourne Victory. The title against Newcastle, you mentioned the Melbourne derbies, and there's been a lot of games where not necessarily they've relied on him to win, but he's just been there for that one big moment where maybe the defence forgets, or just the big chance that a team gets in the game and he's saving it to keep the clean sheet.
Yeah, I think Australia has a really good record of producing goalkeeper players, and what we're seeing
Yeah.
now in the early seasons of the A-League definitely is that we're seeing players get to like 25, 26, and then making a jump to Europe in the goalkeeping stocks. And I think he was excellent. Started his career at Sheffield United in England as a youth player, came back to Australia, did quite well obviously as a backup, and then getting the first team rollout victory, which he held for quite a few seasons. I think right time for the move. I think good move for the player. Not a terrible move for Melbourne Victory, given that they are kind of going into a rebuilding phase almost, even though they will be expected to do well in the division every season. But yeah, I would put it in big loss as well. I think arguably the best goalkeeper in the division last season at his best. Obviously, as you've mentioned, there are a couple of defeats and there are a couple of confidence shakers, but I think a good move for him and one that will be felt for Melbourne Victory fans for the next few seasons. And again, a player that I don't 100% think that they've replaced entirely, so we'll throw him up in that category alongside Josh Brillante and see how he goes from there. But of course, I think he's doing well and hopefully continues to do well because it only improves our depth in that position for the national side, given that he is a young player as well. Jumping forward to another name from Melbourne Victory, Ola Toivonen, the 34-year-old Swede, led the line for Victory at times last season. He was also the captain the most recent year. It initially signalled after his first season in the league that he was perhaps content to stay on in Melbourne, enjoying the city quite a bit. We've seen the likes of Thomas Sorensen and a few other international players come and live in Melbourne permanently after their playing careers have concluded. It looked like maybe it was going to go that way. Obviously, 2020's thrown a whole bunch of different spanners in a whole bunch of different plans throughout the course of the year. He has made the return to Europe. He does sign with Malmo, his boyhood club in Sweden. What's some of your thoughts, Jack, on Toivonen and what he brought to the league, and how are Victory going to go about replacing him?
He's a big loss to the league. Melbourne Victory can't replace him because not simply because that he was such a good finisher, because he's such a good striker, because he was their captain, but because of the positions he took up on the field was so unusual, but they were so unsettling for the defenders. He would drop so deep. I'd often see him, or there's been a few times this season where I've seen him drop basically in a defensive midfield role. And I'm like, why is he there? And then the second later, there's a ball in behind, and the Robbie Cruz is in to miss a one-on-one. And score a one-on-one, sorry. He was just so tactically intelligent. He knew, and his positions, I'd always go, why is he there? That's not where a striker's supposed to be. But it's always for the benefit of not just him, but his teammates in terms of the space he opened up for his teammates. Because you think when you got two centre-backs marking one striker, and all of a sudden the striker's gone, the centre-back's like, who do we mark now? We're just free kind of thing. And then it becomes quite unsettling. And then obviously, he's such a big game player. Like, I remember the goals he scored for Melbourne Victory, the back post headers. He'd often find himself. He's very good at making space off the shoulder of the last defender, so the defender had to turn his head to see him in the back post, and would consistently convert.
Yeah, I mean, he's like 6'6" or something like that, and still scores like pirouette goals and still scores free kicks and, does a little bit of everything. So obviously a great deal of quality for him. I'm not unhappy to see the back of him, but that's the Melbourne City fan in me creeping in. But yeah, definitely one of, in the discussion as being amongst those elite players in the division last year, certainly amongst the elite strikers. He's a big hole. And I think Rudy Gestade, I don't know how you pronounce it, that they've just signed for Melbourne Victory, very different type of player. So I think we're expecting to see perhaps a more agricultural version of Melbourne Victory this season, given that he is kind of, like a target man powering headers home. But I think Toivonen was fantastic for Victory. I think there's a lot of fans that are perhaps going to miss him quite a bit from the navy blue side of Melbourne, but definitely towards the top of the big loss category. Hopefully, we see players of his ilk and quality coming through the division again over the next few years. Jumping forward from one of the older internationals to a player that feels like he's been around forever, Jack, and I'm a little bit older than you, so it says quite a bit if Dimi Petratos has been in and around the league since his very early formative years. He makes the move across to Al Wahda in the Saudi Professional League. What are some of your thoughts on Dimi Petratos leaving the Newcastle Jets and, of course, where he's head over in Saudi Arabia?
Petratos was very, very good. I've said that a lot, but for Newcastle, he was their talisman, their playmaker. He was the man where they're in a position of the panic, and he takes on someone and passes them, and all of a sudden they've got a counter-attack going. He was very versatile in terms of when Ronnie Vargas was at the club, he was playing more of a inverted right wing role. and then he moves into the attacking role. He can also play on the left. I think that he got displaced by Nick Fitzgerald towards the end of his career. Maybe he dropped off a bit looking for a move to overseas, Saudi Arabia, but a really quality player, and Newcastle and the league will miss what he brought.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a player that needs to be the main man in his side, so to speak. Yeah. And there's a couple of different players that we might mention that about, or have mentioned it already, where he needs to be the creative hub, and he's kind of like almost a volume user of the ball. He needs a variety of chances and everything to run through him for him to really get the most out of him and to get him in form and to get him in fitness. His best season obviously was that year that Newcastle made the grand final, where he had Andrew Naboo alongside him playing up top, where you mentioned Vargas also in there as well. But again, like, I don't necessarily think he's always well regarded by fans of that club. I don't think he's necessarily as regarded by fans of opposition clubs, if that makes sense. You know, like, would you take Petratos in the starting 11 of the Sydney FC side at the moment? Maybe not. I probably wouldn't take him at Melbourne City either. So, like, a good player and a capable hand. I'm a bit torn, because if we had a Newcastle fan on, I think they would say this is a huge loss to the league, because Newcastle haven't replaced him. They didn't recoup that much from the sale either. And obviously, you know, he is probably in their starting 11 each and every week. But at the same time, do I look at him as being that higher a tier above the likes of Paul Izzo or James Donahue? Not really. So I'm happy to defer to you. I think we could put him in either the We Will Survive at the top end or the bottom end, a big loss. I'm happy to go with your gut feeling.
Newcastle fans, you can attack me all you want, but I do not think he is as big of a loss as, say, for example, Ola Toivonen, what he brought to the league. He would often take, this is off topic, but he would often see a pass and then take 5 touches and then go, I'll blink the pass now. And then the striker is offside. You know, that was the kind of thing. It was a little bit inconsistent in his play. A brilliant player, artist on the ball, and I hope he does well in Saudi Arabia, but I don't think he is as big of a loss as the 3 players in there currently.
Yeah, if anyone wants to go through you, they've got to come through me, mate. So we'll get you protected on Twitter, mate. Don't worry. But yeah, look, I'd agree with that. And then the challenge as well is that Saudi Arabia doesn't have the best record of paying Australian players on time. It is a tough place to be an international player if you're not performing at a high level. So we hope it works out for him. He's at the same club that Craig Goodwin's at. So there is definitely an Australian flair, and they are giving Craig Goodwin a lot of opportunities. Hopefully it works out for Petratos in the same mould. If it doesn't, I'm sure he'll be back in the A-League. Both of his brothers are still playing at Newcastle, so he's immediately got familial ties in that area. Jumping forward to another strange move. This one is a loan move, but this time to England. Matt Miller leaves Newcastle Jets to join Shrewsbury in League 2 of the English League structure. It might be League 1. As I said that out loud, I got a little bit of like a shiver down my spine. Apologies, Shrewsbury fans, if I've gotten that one around the wrong way. What are some of your thoughts, Jack, on the loan move to England and what it means for Matt Miller?
Matt Miller's a very interesting player. He first broke onto the scene beginning of 2019-20 with the Mariners. Very, very explosive fullback, wingback, very tricky on the ball, and he was pretty much, I think he's in a very different way, but quite similar what he brought to the Mariners side, what Trent Alexander-Arnold brings to Liverpool in terms of a lot went through him, which is a bit unusual because he's from right back. I was very excited to see him go to Newcastle, plainly because they played a 3 at the back formation, which meant he could play right wing back. Defending is not his strong point. It's his physicality, it's his verticality of his runs, his ambition to just go towards goal, which you don't see from a right back. That is very exciting. He has the physicality to play in England. He has the pace, he has the power. I would argue he has the technical ability, and I don't think we'll be seeing him back at the A-League.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because he's, and I'm going to be a massive hypocrite because I talked about it the other way before, but he's actually a player that did drop out of, A-League youth structures, went into the NPL level, did well, signed for Central Coast, and then kicked on to sign for Newcastle the year after. So I think he was Melbourne City junior, and then never really he might have made first team appearances, but never really broke into the first team. Then made the move, I think, to a couple of different clubs, including South Melbourne in the NPL structure in Victoria, then Central Coast, and then to Newcastle. Had good years at both Central Coast and Newcastle, and now has already scored actually at Shrewsbury as well. So hopefully it's a really great story, and he works his way back to professional football from there. But time will tell with this one. We haven't seen that many loan moves to Europe, and maybe it's something that the league needs to look at more positively to say, we've had a variety of players move to clubs that never made first team appearances and just went out on loan places and then came back, the likes of Anthony Caceres, Luke Bratton, whoever else. Maybe this is something that we look at as a model for the future, where players do go and do 12 months on loan, and if they make it at that club, the club signs them permanently, and if they don't, they make a return to the A-League and still have that stability in their lineup. I think we'll survive it, but again, good player, would probably get into a lot of different lineups. I don't think he gets ahead of Ryan Grant in Sydney FC's lineup, but he'd definitely be a shout to maybe be a good player for a Melbourne City or Victory or Western Sydney or someone like that. So, yeah, good player. I think we throw him in that same category with the likes of Paul Izzo, Dimi Petratos, of someone that, is decent and a good hand around the league, but it's not going to kill us the same way that the big losses do. Jumping forward now sorry, Jack. No, go for it, mate.
Oh, sorry. Well, just to side with you on A-League clubs not signing NPL players, I think there is a common denominator in Matt Miller went to Central Coast, and so did Jordan Murray. So it's Central Coast looking at the NPL players, and they are the only one really making that move at the moment.
Yeah, well, they're selling for profit as well. Like, they're trying to bring in players that they can then pass on to bigger clubs. If they do eventually get transfers in and around the A-League, it'll be so interesting to see what Central Coast model is during that period. Right, so next one up, Abdil Arroyo, also leaving the Newcastle Jets, international striker that perhaps didn't always capture the hearts and minds on the Hunter itself. What were some of your thoughts on Arroyo? Obviously, it looked like physically he had quite a lot of gifts, but didn't really ever make it click in terms of goals and finishes in the league itself.
Arroyo's a really interesting one for Newcastle. I thought that he was technically quite good. He had good hold-up play, and obviously the physicality to hold up off his defenders while on the ball. Also, the pace to run in behind. His finishing wasn't quite there. I would have actually liked to see Newcastle keep him on for another season or two, just to see how he develops. He's quite young, and like you say, physically brilliant in the league. He could bully defenders, and I think if he was to add that finishing touch to the game, he could be quite a leading A-League striker. He had the hold-up play, in my opinion. He could make the right runs. He was good on the ball, but you don't necessarily need to be good on the ball as a striker. It's just a real finishing touch, I agree with you, that makes a difference here.
Yeah, and maybe this is one of those scenarios where, so I think he's 24 or 25. If he was 24
I think he's 25.
25, yeah. Like, if he was Australian,
so, yeah.
He probably gets a club that takes that time to develop him further and probably gets that opportunity to kind of grow over a 3 or 4 year period. I think what happens is, because he's an international player, because he's taking up a visa spot, there's that much added pressure that you expect him to be more of a finished article. And maybe that's why it didn't work for him. Because there were flashes of it, and I think Carl Robinson definitely took steps to start getting the best out of him. But, obviously the challenge with Newcastle at the moment is that they don't have stable ownership. They don't have stable payments for players and all that sort of stuff. I would almost say it's a smart move for him, personally, but for the league itself, I don't know where
I think it's a smart move. He's 26, by the way.
Oh, 26, apologies. He's had a birthday, obviously, since we last saw him.
Yes. It's a smart move for him. I think it is a loss for Newcastle. I agree with you. If he's a 26-year-old Australian striker, then a club picks him up. I'm actually quite surprised that the Mariners didn't have a go at getting him.
They do sign pretty much any international player that gets released in the league. Like, Mariners will go after whoever's available to them, and that might come up in some of their players and departures as well. But where would you position him on the board, do you think? He's kind of an interesting one.
On the board. Definitely not a good riddance. I would be looking somewhere between smart move and I think probably. See, it's a smart move for him. I don't necessarily believe it's a smart move for either the league or Newcastle. So
I guess that leaves We Will Survive as the category for him.
Yeah, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Again, I think he's a challenging one because and again, I think it's just when you get an international player in, you kind of expect them to... Whoops, I dropped you in the wrong one. You expect them to be a little bit more finished of an article, and you expect them to be a little bit stronger in terms of their playing capacity. And I think if he was Australian, if he was, going to a club like a Central Coast Mariners, he might get that extra time. He might get that 3-4 year deal. We've seen the Mariners give contracts out to players who definitely weren't of the right standard and the right quality. But yeah, I think just Newcastle's difficult situation makes it a good move for him. Whether or not it turns out to be a good move for the league, it's really going to tell with time. I don't think there's too much that we can do to really make that call at this point. Not a terrible player, but doesn't kill us to the level that the big loss players do, if I'm being completely honest. I think where we've put him is potentially the nicest place. And people are getting behind the scenes views of me struggling to get everything positioned perfectly on the page now that our We Will Survive group has grown to twice its size. But time will tell with that one. If Newcastle sign a player that scores them 10 goals this year, everyone will have forgotten it. Like, no one will remember a single thing. And Roy O'Donovan could be that player for them. So, it remains to be seen how that works out. Jumping forward to the next one, and this is the one that I mentioned to you earlier about this is definitely a Photoshop because I found the original photo of Nick Fitzgerald and he's about 20 kilos lighter based on the frame of this particular player. But obviously was at Melbourne City. Had some decent flashes throughout that time. Also spent the early part of his career at Brisbane and Central Coast Mariners when they were both two very big sides in the division. Most recently at the Newcastle Jets, where you previously mentioned he did displace Dimi Petratos in the starting 11. What were some of your thoughts on Nick Fitzgerald as a player, and how do you think the move over to Jamshedpur FC in the Indian Super League suits him?
He showed, like you said, flashes of brilliance, which were probably on level in terms of talent as, like any good A-League winger. But the inconsistency let him down. He tried multiple clubs. I thought Newcastle was a good place for him to grow, especially under Ernie Merrick, who wasn't there long. But with him, confidence, I think, is the main issue. He is a winger, but I think he feels he has to score. You see the relief in his face when he scores. You see him go, I've scored, this is good. But he's a lot more than that. He is adept at both keeping the ball in tight positions and making runs in behind with his pace. And I think that he's quite a loss for Newcastle, especially considering the person who he did displace, Petratos, has also left. Obviously there is the issue of Newcastle's ownership, but he's a loss.
Yeah, I don't think he's good riddance level. I don't think that would be fair.
Oh, no.
But again, it's probably a smart move for him because he's going to get himself paid over in India. But I think it's more of a We Will Survive one. I think there's that many young players in the youth league or on the fringes of A-League squads that are desperate for a position. And he's not that good that I think he should be taking that position away from a player, if that makes sense. And I'm sure there's NPL players that have probably had better seasons this past year than he did at an A-League level over the last 2 or 3 seasons. So I think maybe we throw him in the We Will Survive category. But again, not a bad player. On his day, can be very, very good. But really, his day doesn't come that often, so to speak, if that makes sense. We do jump to another one, which I think goes in a kind of similar category. This is Jacob Tratt, who has spent some time at Sydney FC and also at Perth Glory, his most recent club. If you go and search Jacob Tratt on YouTube, the first thing that comes up is a very stupid penalty that he gave away in a very critical time of a game last year. Another player that I wouldn't necessarily have picked as being one that was, a great defender in the A-League. Didn't even really start that many games for Perth, truth be told. But he's made the jump over to Odisha FC, where he will partner another A-League ex-player, who we'll get to in a little bit. What are some of your memories of Jacob Tratt, and what do you think this move means for him?
Jacob Tratt, I think he has great potential. Very physical, very tall, very strong, and reasonably fast for a centre-back. I was quite excited to see him go to Perth, especially considering how Tony Popovic uses the rotations in terms of he's consistently rotating players, and Tratt is capable of playing wing back as he did a few times. But the inconsistencies let him down in the Tony Popovic side. You cannot give away a silly penalty. Tratt did that once or twice out of the side. I think that this move to India is quite good for him in terms of if he can find a consistent level. I think he could be an A-League level defender, to say. I was actually quite surprised that Sydney got rid of him, considering that both McGowan and Wilkinson are not going to get any younger. Wilkinson is obviously in the squad, but I thought I would like to see him push McGowan a bit more in the same way I think Boland can do this season. I was then excited to see him go to Perth because there's 3 spots he can fight for, 3 centre-back positions plus maybe even a wing-back position, which I wouldn't see him in starting but off the bench. And things just haven't really gone right for him. And like I said, it's just the inconsistencies that have let him down. But he could do well in India.
Yeah, I think what kind of is striking that you've mentioned, he was in a similar vein to Aaron Calver, where Sydney FC were
Yeah.
happy to let him go, and that wasn't really a big issue as he's kind of getting to 23, 24, 25. Jacob Tratt's now 26, and he still seems to be like one of those players that I think a lot of people think are in their early 20s. Like, he's been around the league
Yes.
quite some time, and I think maybe Sydney FC looked at Ben Warland, who you've already mentioned, and Patrick Flopman, and thought, you know what, we've actually got the same level of quality here. That could potentially be something much more. So, yeah, I think it's an okay one. I think he goes in the We Will Survive category because, again, not a terrible player. He's not deserving of the good riddance or anything like that. He hasn't done anything to make me think that he should have done that much more, if that makes sense. Like, Jacob Tratt is what Jacob Tratt is. I've never thought Jacob Tratt was a star player. So, I don't think he necessarily is even on the level of a Nick Fitzgerald or a Scott Neville or even Jordan Murray to an extent, those guys that are kind of in that We Will Survive category. So maybe we throw him at the bottom of that end. And then, maybe we'll revisit that at the end if we think maybe he's too high or something like that. But a good move for him. Hopefully he gets himself paid. Hopefully he gets consistent football. And maybe he does thrive and become a very talented defender. We have seen it happen before throughout the league.
Especially next to...
We'll get to him in a minute. We'll get to him in a minute because he's obviously a quality player. The next one, Joel Chianese. Joel Chianese was like the first player that announced they were signing for an ISL side well and truly before the end of the A-League season. He did stay longer than anticipated, longer than the end of his contract with the COVID lockdown and the delayed resumption of the league. Did quite well, arguably had probably his best season since his inaugural years at Sydney FC for Perth last time out. Obviously, there were injuries to Chris Economides. Diego Castro didn't play all that much. Bruno Fornaroli in and out of the side. Really is leaving the league on the back of his best ever season, but he is, again, an older player that perhaps wouldn't have been in the starting lineup at his club if not for other injuries in other positions. What are some of your thoughts on Joel Chianese and his move to the ISL?
Chianese had a job under Tony Popovich, which was to stretch the defence and allow as much space for Castro and Fornaroli to work their 1-2 step magic in. He did that job exceptionally well. And then after Economides got injured, was the clear starter for that position. He was very consistent as well. It struck me how much he scored, like in terms of the positions he got into, where you'd expect like a 0.25 expected goals, and he just converted just consistently. But then the problem was when there was the actual one-on-ones, he's always struggled with that, the final product to say, which is the same with a lot of wingers, young wingers in Australia. The problem is that Joel Chianese is not that young. I'm pretty sure he's 29, 30, around that age. And it's the same thing with Nikola Milojevic. His properties, his strengths are his pace, his physicality, and his, like, I guess on the ball running with speed. And that's only going to go down. And I think that Perth will miss him, but in terms of they probably would be playing Economides ahead of him anyway. It is a good move. I would put it in the smart move category. I think that Perth, they got what they could out of him, and now they've moved him on. And Chianese will hopefully get game time and more pay.
He has a player as well that's gone to Southeast Asia before, left the A-League, gone to Southeast Asia and come back. So I'm fine with smart move. Maybe we put him at the bottom category of smart move because his potential isn't as high as some of the other players in that group. But yeah, I'm fine with that. I think you make all excellent points. The next one coming up. This one's going to sting you a little bit, Jack, so try and brace yourself as best as possible. Adam Lafondre, after 2 fantastic seasons at Sydney FC, makes the move on loan over to Mumbai City FC. Full disclosure, if you watched our podcast yesterday that came out, he actually comes back to Sydney FC when you go a couple of years ahead. His loan move is for 12 months. It does take him to the end of his Sydney FC contract. Somehow, Sydney FC convinced him to sign another year on his deal, and he came back to the Harbour City. That's not the real world, though. The real world is that he's heading to Mumbai. If he does well in Mumbai, the likelihood is he will sign for them permanently at the end of his Sydney FC contract. What are some of your thoughts on this move? First, the use of the loan itself and what Lafondre meant to Sydney FC last season.
Sydney did receive a loan fee from Lafondre, which is good in terms of their point of view, not just loaning out their best striker. When Lafondre originally left, I was going, obviously, big loss, second top goal scorer 2 years in a row. But Trent Bahaja, and Luka Ivanovic, probably all three could replace the goals. I've watched 2 Asian Champions League games, and I've realised how helpful it is to have a striker where anything hit in the box he touches pretty much goes on target at the very least. I think that without wanting to go too into the Asian Champions League performances from Sydney, they've played well, but they've definitely missed that killer instinct Lafondre has in front of goal. Just, I've got a chance here, I'm going to take it, and he takes it every time. And scoring a goal is just not as easy as he makes it look. He is, and then in terms of what he's done off the field, he, not single-handedly, but he was definitely played a part in bringing Simon Cox and Jem Karakan to the A-League. They both publicly said, I've been approached by it. They publicly said that they messaged him saying, I've been approached by another league side. Do you think I should come to Australia? And he said, yes, you'll love it here. And Jem Karakan didn't do too well at the Mariners. Simon Cox is still developing at the Wanderers, but at the end of the day, he brought 2 players here. And that pulling power isn't something you see every day.
Yeah, it's always good to hear of players, come into the league and enjoying the quality of life and stuff and recommending it to other professionals. I think that's a big part of what certain clubs have done very well. We'll talk further about Adelaide in their season preview. You and I have spoken about Adam Lafondre and how Sydney best replace him in the season preview, which you can check out. Oh, pardon me for hiccuping. Which you can check out in the channel itself. But he also loves Football Manager. So now he's left the league and I'm not rooting against him for any side. We can put him very high on the list. I think he goes probably even just ahead of Ola Toivonen as a player that has done very, very well, winning quite a bit in limited time within the league itself. I think a big loss to the league. I think one of the biggest question marks against Sydney FC, while they do have a very good squad, is how they replace his goals. And as you've already kind of alluded to, early doors, Asian Champions League, obviously a big challenge. That hub model, obviously a big challenge as well. But it is proving a challenge to replicate what he would do in and around the box when those opportunities fell Sydney FC's way. But a great player. It remains to be seen if life imitates art as far as Football Manager is concerned, and we see him again. I wouldn't expect it because his quality is going to show through. He's going to do quite well at India.
He has already scored. He scored a last-minute winner, pretty much.
Yeah, that sounds very on brand for him, to be completely honest with you.
Yes.
The next one that comes up, another young player that we have mentioned previously in our season preview, Ryan Teague, joins Famalicão over in Portugal. He's playing with their youth side. The picture that you can see here is an appearance for, I think, their under-18 side or under-19 team. A young player, didn't really make any first-team appearances for Sydney FC. What are some of your thoughts on him as a prospect and his move overseas?
Well, I was at the stadium where he made his only appearance for Sydney FC. Sydney were 5-0 up against Brisbane. He came on and I whispered to my friend, you watch him, he's very good. And he's like, all right, watches him. He gives away a penalty, and that was his only major action in the game. But that's not sum him up at all. He's very composed on the ball from what I've seen in terms of him playing for the NPL side and youth teams for Sydney. Good in a tackle, and obviously, as you can probably see kind of from the fixture, he's very tall, so he wins aerial duels. He's strong. Smart move for him. He's a young player, lots of potential. Probably wouldn't break into the Sydney side, especially when you look at how good Sydney's midfielders are at the moment, especially with the rise of Callum Neuerhoff. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's a smart move for him, smart move for Sydney with the transfer fee.
Maybe we can tie him together with the next conversation because it's also a Sydney FC junior that has left. Joining Brighton and Hove Albion is Cameron Pupion. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but, by all means, if his family's watching, let us know in the comment section below. 2 players that have made big moves to European sides at 17 and 18. My question would kind of be, as a Sydney FC fan, would you not like to have seen a little bit more of them in the A-League before they made this jump? Like, if an 18-year-old player is good enough to be making a jump to Europe, even at an underage level, surely they could have done more like 10, 15, 20-minute spells for them in the A-League, particularly after Sydney did very, very well in the league itself, and obviously after the return from lockdown restrictions, their team struggled just a little bit. So it would have been interesting to see, I think, both these players make first-team appearances. Where would you rate Pupion's move alongside Teague's?
I have actually been following Cameron Pupion's journey so far. For Brighton in the youth teams, he's been doing very, very well. He's been consistently scoring, creating chances. He's formed a very good partnership with another attacking midfielder. I can't remember his name, to be honest with you, but formed a very good partnership, and he's doing well for Brighton. And I think that he does have a relatively clear pathway into a possible first team when you look at how much Graham Potter is quite unorthodox, and he trusts players from nations that aren't considered. Actually, Soccernomics, to bring you back to your Moneyball, Soccernomics is basically the football version of Moneyball. They said that there's a lot of nations that are overrated, and a smart club will find good value in the nations that are not considered footballing nations. That's what Graham Potter's been doing. You look at Jens Basuma, and you look at other players. I can't think of any at the moment, but Jens Basuma, I think that, well, even, Matt Ryan, Aaron Moy, both Australian. Cameron Pouillon has been doing very well. It's a good move. I agree. I would like to see him get some game time, but it's Sydney. We might talk about that later in a different podcast or something. Anyway, it's a smart move for him.
Yeah,
he's a young player and he'll do well.
Yeah, the only thing I can counteract that is that Graham Potter just sold Aaron Moy, and then he's also apparently looking to sell Matt Ryan as well. So I don't know, maybe he's just out. Maybe an Australian kicked sand on his face on a beach one day and he's upset at us all about something. Because they also do have Peter Guagas, who's half Swedish international, half Australian international, hasn't declared for either full side yet, who's 21 and in their youth sides, and he's also apparently knocking on the door of first team opportunities and struggling. So, look, I think it's a good move, definitely. I think I'm an advocate for anybody going to a Premier League club, even at a youth league level. But hopefully it's the right platform for them to kick on and get first team opportunities, either via loan or, by working their way into the first team as well. So we hope they both work out well. I think putting them both alongside each other's in terms of smart moves, young players getting opportunities for a higher standard of coaching and a higher quality of play against people their age is only good for Australian football. So I think it makes sense to put them both together. The next one that we're going to look at, and this moves us across to Wellington Phoenix and one of their outs. It is sort of German, where was his other nation? I'm going to have to check, but it's Matty Steinman, who played as a defensive midfielder for Wellington Phoenix last season. He was pretty good. He did quite well. I think a lot of different players, or a lot of different fans of the Wellington Phoenix are perhaps looking at him as being the biggest player to replace this off-season, which is interesting when we talk about some of the other players to come in a moment. What were some of your thoughts on Steinman from his inaugural season with Wellington and his move to East Bengal as well?
I thought Steinman was very underrated in his quality he brought. He was a 24-year-old German midfielder who joined, and I hadn't heard of him before, but he was so good at what he did. He allowed Cameron Devlin to really be his best in terms of being that destructive, diminutive holding midfielder who was very good on the ball. And Steinman was just that player, kind of strolled around the field. He'd make a tackle here and there, but he was always in the right place at the right time, allowing for Devlin, who is young and didn't have the best defensive positioning off the ball. In terms of Wellington Phoenix, what they did on the ball, he was very composed, extremely good at dribbling. He could actually beat a man quite well, not in terms of taking him on, but in the way he moved his body to form space for himself. Like he'd be like, I'm going to pass it here, and then there's a little through the legs of a defender or something like that. And he does that extraordinarily well. I was really surprised when he came out and said that he wanted to stay at Wellington, that Wellington didn't try at least and re-sign him, and he's a big loss. I mean, they have Alex Rufer there, who will probably just come straight into the first team and replace him. Alex Rufer is a good player and could probably do the job, but Steinman brings something very different to the side.
Yeah, it was interesting when we did the Wellington season preview that they kind of also mentioned Matt Riddington as well as Rufer as young Kiwi players or mid-20 Kiwis players. They're not the same quality though. Like Steinman was very, very good and very young, like 24 years of age. He's half Finnish. Yeah. That was the other country that I couldn't find a minute ago. I would even put him, I think, at the bottom of the big loss category because I don't think they've replaced him with the same level of quality. Obviously, COVID challenges around the world are changing the way clubs recruit and the way clubs promote youth talent. But yeah, I think he was a very, very underrated player for Wellington last season in their structure and the way they did. Where would you sit him on the table?
It's a bold move, I reckon, to put him in big loss because he only spent one season in the league. But, I mean, you look at the quality of players in the big loss. You look at the quality of players in We Will Survive. He is above the quality of every player in the We Will Survive column, meaning he should be at the very top of the big We Will Survive column or the very bottom of the of the big loss column.
Let's sit him in big loss for now, and then when we go through at the end, maybe if we feel a little bit differently about the level of quality, I wouldn't put him miles behind Josh Brillante or Lawrence Thomas. So, it's kind of that, and they get the added advantage of being Australian and having been around the league for quite a bit. But yeah, I wouldn't. He's a tough one. He's a tricky one because you make a good point. It was one season in the league, but it was a very good season. It must be said.
It was a very good season.
Jumping forward to our next one. Now, this is, I'm going to have to double check because I got them around the wrong way the other day, is Callan Elliott, who has also joined Xanthi in the Greek second division. He joins Tony Popovic's revolution over there. Did you see much of Callan Elliott during his one real season in the A-League itself with Wellington?
I did when he played. I was really impressed with him. I was looking forward to seeing him in the A-League this season. I was surprised that he got the move because he played towards the end. He was a starter in the final series as well. I was surprised he got a move, but he's got a lot of potential. He extremely good at the ball from right back. He's got that similar way of playing to Nathaniel Atkinson, where you just feel like he's not going to lose it no matter the tricky position he gets him into out wide, because obviously when you're out wide as a right-footed player, it's in some ways harder to keep the ball because you don't have that option to just kind of cut inside. But he does it really well in the way he kept the ball, keeps possession. He has a good cross to him, which was very useful to Wellington, and it showed because if Ftale needs every individual player for his team to be tactically intelligent, to be disciplined, and to be good at the ball. And he was those three things in a nutshell for Wellington when he played last season. I think it's a very good move for him to actually. I mean, I'm not sure the quality of the Greek Super League. I would have liked to see him stay at Wellington one more season.
Look, I would say it's a smart move because I don't think we could ever discourage a 21-year-old player from going to Europe.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Like, I think he had last year his kind of breakout year. He didn't start the year in Wellington's first team. He worked his way into Wellington's first team and then did well with the opportunity. I think you'd want to see from a player, because we know too often, too early will a player go overseas before they've had an opportunity to really develop and finish, and he could be in that category. But at the same time, I'd argue that he's probably just as good as a Samuel Silvera and probably better than a George Blackwood. Maybe, and the point that you've already touched on is that we don't really know what the standard's like in Greece. We know that he's got an Australian manager, and that will probably help him quite a bit. We know it's obviously someone that Tony Popovic looked at in the A-League and thought, he's fantastic and I want to work with him further. The challenge is Tony Popovic might not get paid. Tony Popovic might get sacked, and then what happens to these two or three players? I think he goes in the smart move category, but I do understand what you're saying about him getting a full season of professional football under his belt. But yeah, time will tell. We'll see how that one goes and how it plays out. Jumping forward, still with Wellington, one of the big names that we've alluded to previously, Stephen Taylor, English central defender, obviously had a long career at Newcastle United and with Peterborough, made his way to Wellington 2 seasons ago, was their captain last year, one of only 3 club captains that Wellington Phoenix has had. He will play alongside Jacob Trapp, which I'm not sure he expected when he made the move over to Odisha in the Union Super League. But what were some of your thoughts on Stephen Taylor as far as the league is concerned and what he brought to the division?
Stephen Taylor brought so much to the division in terms of the uniqueness which he played. He was a classic hard-nosed English defender, but he brought so much more in terms of it. You can't just say that a centre-back that is strong and tall is good in a tackle, because he was so good in his defensive positioning. And you look at how much he improved Luke De Vere, for example. Luke De Vere was a good player with some inconsistencies, very good on the ball. But Stephen Taylor, just a constant berating, be here, be here, be here. And this is the same thing I'm saying for Jacob Trapp. I think he can improve Jacob Trapp by a lot. But really what stands out for me is the fact that every time Wellington got a free kick near the opposition box and he knew he was going to shoot, he'd walk up to the goalkeeper in the face, just in front of everyone, and he'd go, "Oh, you're not going to save this," and just wave his hands in front of his face consistently, and the ref would never know what to do. He'd be like, "Yes, step over here, just move away." And I love that so much, that, there.
So he did do that at Newcastle and at Peterborough. It's technically not against the rules. He's not encroaching on anything. He's not blocking anyone's view. He's not doing anything. The one thing he has to do is get back on side once the referee blows the whistle. But the only thing that it was lacking is that Wellington didn't have a good enough free kick taker to put one in the top corner. Because we were all dying for that to happen at one point throughout the year, and I don't think they even got one on target, which is crazy.
You imagine what would happen if they put one in the top corner, he walks up and goes, "Why don't you save it? Why don't you save it?" That's just something he would do.
Yeah, he definitely would. I think he was a good character. I thought he brought a lot to the league, and I think, his quality Perhaps other leagues around the world he wouldn't do as well because his legs aren't quite there yet, but I think he was perfect for the A-League in terms of like an experienced defender, as you mentioned, coaching others through. I would put him in the big loss category, potentially between Toivonen and Brillante. We'll get ourselves like a nice separation going between the Australian and the US talent. Not as technically gifted as Toivonen, not as big a match winner as Toivonen, but definitely was very critical of what Wellington did last year. And the experience gap, that's the big challenge that they've got this season, trying to replace that experience because his is second to none. Another player for Wellington that has left, Gary Hooper, obviously long-time Celtic striker, came across, took a very long time to get fit for Wellington Phoenix. Full disclosure, I actually quite liked Gary Hooper. I thought he was a very good player. The ball seemed to always just stick with him and he never really lost it. But when we did our Wellington season preview, they weren't that fussed about him leaving. They thought David Ball was the better prospect of the two. For Gary Hooper, what were some of your thoughts on his time with Wellington? And what do you think of his move to the Kerala Blasters in the A-League? This is the one that I mentioned earlier. I think he will still start ahead of Jordan Murray most weeks. So I don't know if they're going to play two up top or what the scenario is. I could be completely wrong. Kerala Blasters fans, let us know in the comment section. But yeah, I think it's an interesting move for him and an interesting replacement that Wellington will have to set out to find.
Jordan Murray came on at right wing for 15 minutes. That's where, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's where you see him playing for them this season, assuming that Gary Hooper stays fit. But Hooper was very unlucky with his injuries at Wellington. You look at him and you look at his pedigree, you look at Celtic, for example. And I went through a few articles and Celtic fans, they're like, oh, he's in Australia now, bad league, right? But they're like, imagine if he stayed at Celtic, he could be like one of the best strikers in the division, one of the best strikers even in the, like a top striker. But I think he still has the potential. I think there is a loss for Wellington, but in terms of what he brought, if you're looking at his particular season at Wellington, David Ball did play better than him, partly due to David Ball not being injured.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think maybe top of We Will Survive because there was obvious quality there and he wasn't a bad player by any stretch, but I don't think he ever hit the heights of the likes of Steinman and Taylor at Wellington, even just in that same little group. So they'll get through it, but it is going to be a challenge to see who they bring in of that same quality, and I'm sure he'll hit the ground running in India as well, playing against potentially a lower quality of opposition. Who knows? We'll see how that plays out. The next one, making his way to second division, Denmark, Callum McCowett. Now, I did accidentally get him around the wrong way with Callan Elliott in our Wellington Phoenix season preview. Thanks to everyone that pointed that out on Twitter. He makes the jump across to effectively like a second division side, a second tier team. Do you have any memories of McCowett and his playing time in the division itself? And what do you think this move means for a young player?
McCowett, when I first started watching him, I wasn't particularly impressed. He seemed like a very generic left winger that just looked to cut inside and finish top corner, except he didn't finish at top corner. And more often than not, he'd be tackled when trying to cut inside. But as the season went on, he developed into a very mature, good young player. He was forcing Piscopo, who was displacing him in terms of the left, onto the right for quite a bit of the season, which I think says a lot about his quality and what he can offer. This is a good move for him, I think. A bit more stability, a bit more game time. Not more game time, sorry, but like game time at similar, maybe a bit higher of a level.
Yeah,
it's a smart move for him.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I would put it alongside George Blackwood. I think he's probably dropped down a tier to make sure that he gets first-team football more readily. I don't think the way that we've spoken about Samuel Silvera, the way we've spoken about Pipion and Teague from Sydney FC, that he's looking to go across and play youth football. He's 21 years of age now, so he really needs to step into the first-team frame at some point. And maybe that's why he's gone a tier down, to try and angle to get a move, if he does well, to a team in the higher division. So I'd throw him alongside Blackwood. I think that's fair. I don't think he has enough history in the league for us to really make a case for him to sit anyway. But the next one, a player that does have very good history in the league, a player that has been probably looking to make a move to Europe for a couple of seasons. Thankfully, as we've already said, did that full season as a starting footballer for Wellington Phoenix, is Liberato Cacace, who moves to Sint-Truiden, managed by Australian Kevin Muscat in the Belgian Jupiler League. What were some of your thoughts on Cacace, and how big a hole do you think he leaves for the club and the league itself?
I did a A-League team of the season so far after we first went into lockdown, and all over the pitch, I was like, oh, but who goes at right back? Is it Josh Risen? Is it Ryan Grant? Who goes up striker? Is it, Lafondre Toivonen, a few others? But then it comes to left back, I'm like, who goes at left back? Kakache, and there's literally just no comparison. And then you add on the fact that he's 20 years old. He's played 2 seasons pretty much of professional football. But starting at left wing back, moving to left back where he was allowed to go up, but he did have a defensive role in a back four. He has shown, I don't know what else to say about him. He is physically extremely good, very fast. His attacking output is excellent. Towards the end of games for Wellington, you'd think they'd be defending. He would sit himself on the halfway line. They play the ball through to him. And I think, well, at least I remember one occasion in particular where he settled a game by running in behind and just converting it bottom corner. He knows how to use his body. You saw the penalty he won. I rewatched the other day against Sydney FC in that first game back from isolation. It was very smart use of the way he made an experienced defender in McGowan foul him inside the box. And he just has that explosiveness about him, same as Matt Miller, except with a lot more quality in terms of what he can offer in the final third. Yeah, and defensively, he's very good.
Yeah, I think he was very good last year, and I think he was a worthy contender for best left back in the division for sure. I would put him alongside Riley Mcgree. I think this is potentially a better move than Riley Mcgree's because he's contracted to a European club. He's in a division where he will be able to play at that level and potentially use it as a building block to move to a bigger team in Belgium or a bigger club in another European division. The only thing that you could maybe count against the move is that maybe he could have even aimed a little bit higher. We saw Sarpreet Singh go to Bayern Munich a year before, and they weren't that far apart in terms of overall quality. I think maybe the difference is that Bayern Munich have Alphonso Davies and David Alaba, two of the better left-backs in world football. But I personally would have picked Kakache in my team ahead of Sarpreet Singh. So maybe it's not quite the biggest challenge for him, but I think for a lot of players, especially at 20 years of age, he needs consistent football. And from what I've heard, I don't watch a lot of Belgian football, so I haven't seen it directly. But from what I've heard, he has started pretty well to life in the European game. Where would you think... I would put him at the top of the smart move categories because I think it was time for him to go overseas. But, I know you're a big rap for him. Where would you potentially put him on the board?
I think there's a case to put him in big loss, but you look at there's no way he was staying in the league any longer. And I think it's a smart move for him. Wellington, they have to let him go. They've developed him brilliantly. But there's nothing more they can really do. Keeping him any longer is just holding it back. So it's a smart move for him.
And they did get the cash for him as well. So I think they got nearly 2 million New Zealand dollars or something like that by the time all the add-ons and stuff come into it. So they've done well, I think, to get the best out of him to continue his development. And then for any club that's trying to develop young players, for the best of New Zealand football, for the best of Australian football, getting them out there into a higher level to go and be challenged. If he had stayed for another 2-3 years in the league, he'd ended up in like the K-League or the J-League, probably rotting away in a reserve side. So eventually that move comes, and I think making the right decisions as to where you go always helps quite a bit as well. But good to see him doing well in the early part of his season. Another one, and an interesting one, obviously you have to put aside your Western Sydney bias, but he did play for Sydney FC back in the day. Matt German, one of the other players that has joined the Australian Revolution with Xanthi in the Greek second division. What are some of your thoughts on German and how he performed in the league and the hole that he leaves behind?
He was very, very consistent for the Wanderers. He played on the left of a back three. Good on the ball. He had that thing I love to see, which is a left centre-back with a left foot who can just swing the ball down the line in just like a very aesthetically pleasing way. And he was defensively solid. We've seen it before. The clubs he's been at kind of shows it. And he's a big loss for Western Sydney. I wouldn't necessarily put him in the big loss column in terms of what he brought to the league. He was a consistent performer when it comes to who were the best A-League defenders last season. I did not hear many people talking about him in that manner. I think he was underrated in terms of he was in the Wanderers side that was quite leaky, quite inconsistent. And this move to Xanthi is come at a time where it's quite pivotal in his career that he makes the right choice in his next move. I think that we will survive without him, but he's definitely a loss to the Wanderers.
Yeah, I'll go along with that. Let's put him at the top of We Will Survive because I think a very good player. I think he's moving to a manager that's going to get the best out of him and clearly wants him. That's why he's moved to Popovic. But again, he's a player that has already left once. Like he went and played in Korea and then went to Al Ittihad, who I think is in the UAE. I'm happy to be corrected in the comment section below, and then came back to Western Sydney. So at 30 years of age, he's probably not got that many international years or European years left in him. So maybe a good time to head over there and get a couple of seasons of European football before coming back to the A-League at 32 or 33. But yeah, again, I wouldn't say big loss either, but still a very, very talented player. The next one, very similar mould though. Mitch Duke was the captain at Western Sydney Wanderers, was doing, I think, quite well for Western Sydney in a poor Western Sydney side. And the photo that you can see on the screen here is him actually scoring for his new club, of which I will butcher the pronunciation, Al Toivonen from the Saudi Arabian Professional Division. He's already scored. This is his goal-scoring celebration to put them through to the last 16 of the Champions League. So he's immediately made the jump to a decent club. I could see the case for him being a big loss because he was very important to Western Sydney, but also I don't think Western Sydney were really moving in a direction with Carl Robinson that would have gotten the best out of Mitch Duke anyway. So he might be a similar conversation to what we've just had with Matt German about being a very, very good player, but maybe just towards the top of that we will survive it category, given that he has left the league before and has come back. What are some of your thoughts on Mitch Duke?
Mitch Duke was extremely consistent last season. He was playing an all-action role up front. He was on the left of the front two. He was their top goal scorer. He's so good at just keep running the ball down the line, just keeping it, using his physicality. Big game player, scored in derbies, which is nice and fun. And he had that beautiful thing where he cut inside and he'd play a long switch ball down towards the right flank, and every time it was perfect. And you go, that's not what you expect from a striker, but that's his technical quality he was best. And I heard him talking about the Wanderers after they didn't make the finals. He was extremely passionate about their club as a whole. So he was just what he was saying, and it really resonated with me as a Sydney fan as well. And it almost made me feel a bit bad for the Wanderers not making the finals, or even for him as the captain of the club when he's so passionate, and you could just see that the other players really weren't as passionate as him about his football club. And he's really one for the fans. I would argue that he could make a case for big loss.
How about we put him in big loss alongside Matty Steinman? That the little bit that gets him ahead of Matt German is the fact that he was the captain of the club.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go with that.
Also,
I'm comfortable with that.
A game changer.
And a game changer, yeah, of course. We'll put him at the bottom of big loss, to be fair, because I don't think he's that big a quality step up to some of the players in the We Will Survive column. But yeah, certainly if he can convince you, a diehard Sydney FC fan, that Western Sydney should have been in the finals, then he's obviously a more talented spokesman and marketing person in the league. It's too late, man. It's already on the internet, man. They're probably going to revoke your membership or something. I don't really know. No, I'm kidding. I know what you mean, mate. But yeah, I think bottom of big loss because obviously big shoes to fill. One of the few players I think that you could say performed very well for Western Sydney side that has struggled for a few seasons. Be interesting to see how different Western Sydney looks under Carl Robinson and if he does the same sort of rebuild job that he was doing at Newcastle. Does bring us to our last player though. This is Radoslav Mcglinchey, who was a marquee player at Western Sydney Wanderers last season. He did do his cruciate ligament very early on in the season. I'm going to give you a bit of a story here, Jack. We've included him because he has officially departed the league at the end of last season, the end of his contract. Didn't make a return to the A-League after that injury. He went back to Poland. Western Sydney continued to pay for his rehabilitation during his injury, paid out all the way through to the end of his contract. When he was due to come back to Australia, obviously the lockdown happened and he wasn't able to return to the country. He then went into the media and absolutely slated the standard of quality of the A-League itself and the club, and kind of slated Dylan McGowan a little bit as being the person that injured him in training. It seemed like a weird one to me because Western Sydney continued to look after him, continued to pay out the rest of his contract, allowed him to return to Poland to be with his family while he was recovering. It seemed like a weird one for him to turn around and put the boot straight back into a club that supported him during that injury period. So I would kind of make a case to say good riddance. Not that he wasn't a bad player. He was a very good player the early parts that we saw, and I understand his frustration with getting injured, and I can understand his frustration with getting the absolute crap kicked out of him in training. But it just seemed like a weird one for him to turn around and put the boot into a club that paid him all the way through his contract and that allowed him to be there closer to his family in Europe. What were some of your thoughts as a Sydney fan to Mcglinchey, the brief period that we did see him play, and his now departure for the club, his return to be playing in Poland? I'm not even going to try and pronounce the club that he's playing at now because I wouldn't get anywhere near it. But what are some of your thoughts, Jack?
I'm sorry, I can't say. I did not see him play. I know he played in the early rounds of the FFA Cup, but I didn't I wasn't able to tune in for that game. He seems like a very good playmaker, good on the ball, as you'd expect from a marquee playmaker. I don't like the way he's talked about the A-League. So yeah.
For talking shit about our beloved A-League, we're going to throw him in the bin. He can go in the good riddance category, and we're best of luck to him. Hope he stays fit, all that sort of stuff. We don't wish injuries or anything on anyone, but it makes it a challenge. That does bring us to an end, Jack. So we've got through quite a few players. I'll just recap them here for you. So in our good riddance column, we have a few different players, none of which I think move up. Are there any of them jumping up at you there that think maybe we should bring them up? I know we mentioned Dean Bezanis as maybe someone that is a little bit hard done by in that lineup and in that structure. But anyone that's jumping out at you there?
No, I think that Dean Bezanis is, you look at the quality of the players in the category above him, and I don't think he makes it.
Yeah, I think smart move category, we've definitely focused on younger players, with the exception being Joel Keane because of his move to the ISL. I don't think there's anyone that we would move up out of that category, because I think it almost is smart move is kind of secondary to big loss almost. It's just the other end of the spectrum as we work back down to leaving the league. We will survive category. I'll just go through the top couple that maybe we could look at as going a little bit up. But Matt German, Gary Hooper, Matt Miller, Paul Izzo, Dimitri Petratos, James Donahue, Nikola Miluznic. Any there that you think we've maybe been a little bit too harsh on or a little bit too generous to? I think I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest with you, mate, but happy to adjust on your feedback.
Yeah, I don't think that he should move up, but in terms of the Paul Izzo, what he could bring to the A-League in the future, he could be the top goalkeeper in 2-3 years' time.
Let's put him at the top of We Will Survive then. We'll put him ahead of Matt German and Gary Hooper, and he can be right on that fringe, because I'd agree with you. He's still young enough that he could come back to the league and contribute for quite a long time as a goalkeeper as well. And then our big loss category. Now focus on this portion, basically the order that I read them. So Adam Lafondra, top of the list. Ola Toivonen, Stephen Taylor, Josh Brillante, Lawrence Thomas, Matty Steinman, and Mitch Duke. Any there that you think we've been too generous to and maybe need to move down? Or the other way, anyone that you think needs to move higher up that list in the order that they're in?
No, I don't really have a problem with that, but what do you think? Because I know that Mitch Duke, maybe you think he could be top of We Will Survive?
I'm happy to give him the nudge into big loss, just by the fact that he was Western Sydney's captain. He was probably the only player, I think, over the Marcus Babbel era that could say performed really, really well and consistently throughout that time. I think also, it's rare that we actually get players go to Middle Eastern countries and come back a better player. And I think unique instance for Mitch Duke and perhaps Matt German as well, where they left the A-League not quite the finished article and came back definitely more polished and more proven performers. So I'm more than happy to put him there. I think he's the bottom of the big loss category, to be honest with you, because I don't think Western Sydney had anyone that was that vital or critical to their future chances in season, but more than happy to throw him in there. I think I'm pretty happy with the list, mate. I think we've both done a fantastic job. So that does bring us to the end of another episode of Reserve Team Rankings. Jack, I always love having you on the show. If you can, have you got any plugs, any content that you want to try and get out there? If people want to see more of your stuff, where can they best find you?
Well, obviously on the Reserve Team website and on Twitter at JackGeorge0004. I have a couple of articles I'm working on that will hopefully be coming out soon.
Yeah, perfect. And Jack's articles and all the great Reserve Team content will be in the description down below. But more than anything, guys, we just appreciate you all watching. You can check the comments below to get a link to this tier list if you disagree with anything that we've positioned anywhere. We do love to see your versions of tier list as well. You can hit us up on Twitter to let us know what you've put in different orders. As always, the best part is the discussion. There's a lot of different varying opinions, a lot of different views. We always love hearing yours. Just because ours are on the channel doesn't mean they are 100% right, so we welcome any and all feedback. From myself, from Jack, from everybody at the Reserve Team, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you all again next time.